Second Nature episode 100. Aaron, Lucy, confetti falling from the ceilings in our respective studios here. What up, bro?
I cannot believe that we made it to 100 episodes and in, I would say, record time. It has been an absolute sprint.
It certainly has been, especially for being a side hustle for both of us. My goodness, 100 episodes under the belt already. It feels like we just got started.
You know what? I'm so proud of all 100 episodes. I know this one will be a banger, but I honestly, the 99 before this, I'm so stoked on every single person that we've brought in. And one thing that I think is really special about all the episodes so far is that for the most part, they're evergreen. You could go back and listen to the Kyle Siegel Raid podcast, and it would be just as relevant now as it was basically a year ago. You could go
Totally.
back and listen to the Jonathan Levitt episode, the Mel Strong episode. I mean, everybody that's come on has brought like a level of value when it comes to tactical and strategic advice that I think still is extremely relevant. So this idea that, the pod happens, currently twice a week and that you got to hit it right when it comes out. No, I think it's like you can go back into the archives and still get a ton of value. So for everybody that's listening, if you missed one, not to worry, they're still valuable. They're still worth going back into the archives to dig out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we did with episode number 50, what we're going to do here today is an AMA with the Second Nature community. The Second Naturalists submitted a menu of fantastic questions, which Aaron and I are going to bat back and forth. But, Aaron, maybe before we get to the questions, you want to just share a little bit about how Second Nature might change after episode 100,
Not too
after the
much.
sprint?
Not too much. You can still expect the same level of quality, but everything that we've done with the podcast, we've always listened to the community. For example, the Slack channel came about because everybody kept telling us, I'm on a long run and I'm screaming into the forest because I want to be part of the conversation. And so we created a space where our audience and community could be part of the conversation. And I would say 10 out of 10 would absolutely have done that again. The Slack community is something really, really special. But one of the other pieces of feedback that we've been hearing a lot lately is I love the podcast and I can't keep up. And we heard that. And we are also about to have a very, very busy summer ahead of us. And so the one thing that we're going to do, we've been going twice a week pretty much since, I don't know, what was it, like episode 12 or something like that. We've been speed running our way to 100 episodes. And I think what we need to do is bring it back down to one episode a week. Same quality that you expect from every episode, but we're going to give everybody a chance to kind of catch up a little bit. Like I said, you can go back into the archives and listen. So if you do catch up, dig back into the stuff we've already done. But I think one really good episode a week will be good. And we reserve the right to change our mind. If we get some backlog going and we want to release a little bit more, maybe we will. But
The semi regular bonus episode
yeah,
or
I think
emergency podcast?
the emergency pod, the emergency bro pod, whatever,
Emergency
whatever,
Pro Pods.
whatever we got to do. But you know what? I think the quality is going to remain where it's at, and we'll be able to maybe even put a little bit more in each episode. But honestly, I think one a week is still like really good, and I think that's maybe something that I get locked into this idea of consistency, and then I just don't know when to let go. But I think we heard this from pretty much everybody. Like, hey, I love this, but I cannot listen to 2.5 hours a week of it, and so we'll just spread it out, which is going to make it easier on not only the audience but also on us. I mean, cranking out 2 podcasts a week in addition to all of our other responsibilities was a full-time deal.
Yeah, I think of our 100 episodes, you didn't appear on only two of them. I think the Mike Rogie pod and the Michael Brandt pod from
Yeah.
Ketone IQ, Mike Rogie from Mountain Gazette. I probably missed like 30% of them. Maybe somebody can use AI to do an analysis of how many episodes I've missed. But no, I think that'll be better. And as you and I have talked about it, I have a visceral, physical unclenching in my body when I think about Second Nature going down to one episode a week. I obviously have been very busy myself and have immense guilt about how much you've been carrying the team. And I hope that I can be a good contributor once a week here on this great and fun platform. I have to say, Second Nature is like my favorite podcast, because I miss so many of them. I mean, I listen to every episode, start to finish, every single one. Even the ones that I'm on, I listen back to and always like feel like I get a new learning or something that I didn't fully absorb during the recording itself. And that is, I think, the evidence that this thing deserves to exist. It is fun to work on for both of us, and we want to continue to do it, but do so in a way that is sustainable over the long term. And I think one episode a week will certainly fit that criteria a little bit better, but still be an instant play every time my feed refreshes. So kudos to us, Lucy. Pat on the back. Now let's let the second naturalist take the wheel. Do you wanna sort of pull, you have the list up in front of you?
Yep, I've got the list. And just one last thing I want to say before we drop into the AMA. We have to say a huge thank you to everybody that's contributed to our success. You know, Ryan Thrower, who's helped us produce every single episode, Brett Jorgensen, who's been editing like the last 30 and probably the next 300 after this, if we can keep him hanging around. We got to say thank you to Steve Holmberg, Sharky, everybody that's kind of jumped in and helped us, you know, keep the boat afloat.
Ming and Slack.
Oh yeah, big shout out to Ming. She's curated a book list that's growing by the episode. So yeah, and there are plenty more people, but yeah, this has certainly not been a singular effort on our part. You know, we've had a lot of help along the way. So big thank you to everybody that's gotten us to episode 100 in so many ways. So
Heck
okay.
yeah. Enough preamble.
All right.
AMA.
Let's party. Okay. First one, Jonathan Levitt asks, there's been a lot of talk about the future of media and creators. Would love to hear some discussions around the future of athletes. I don't know much about NIL, which is name, image, likeness, but would be curious to know how people are advising NCAA athletes and post-grad newly pro athletes. How do they future-proof themselves, at least for the next 3 to 5 years? What would Dylan Bowman do if he were 23 years old and a newly signed TNF pro athlete without any other sponsors and in need of additional cash beyond that contract? What you got?
A big one to start.
That's a big one.
Yeah, we should shout out Jonathan Levitt too. He has been a great supporter of Second Nature and a passionate listener, somebody who comes up with great ideas and is always sort of sending us notes offline. So shout out Jonathan Levitt.
Likely the most referred to episode in our entire catalog. Too.
Yeah. So go back, for those who are new to the pod, listen to the performance marketing versus brand marketing lecture education that Jonathan Levitt provided here on the podcast. I'm always reluctant to like provide advice to people. So maybe I'll frame my answer here as like what I think I did well from when I was 23 to now when I'm 39. I think, you know, in the early days when I came into the sport, it was purely out of a love and a passion for doing it. A curiosity as to whether I could finish a 100-mile race was the reason why I first signed up for the Leadville 100, and everything in my career sort of snowballed from that specific moment. At that period of time, it was impossible to make a professional living as a trail ultramarathon runner. But what I had was an immense desire to do the thing, which we've talked about all the time. That needs to be the center of everything. If you're an athlete, you need to have an intense desire to do the thing, not an intense desire to have a bunch of followers on Instagram, to have a big YouTube channel, to be famous. You have to enjoy the suffering, the monotony, the unglamorous things that go into being a pro. As I was interfacing with the sport with that disposition of passion and love, results followed. So again, a desire to do the thing, it's the classic process over outcome. If you have that, that's the first prerequisite in order to be somebody who has competitive success, stands on podiums, which then of course leads to professional opportunity with sponsorship. I have always kept a side job, even in the heyday, the best years of my running career. I was working for a sports technology company in sales. Even as Lutzi was recruiting me to Red Bull, I carried that job all the way through until I left to focus on free trail full time. So I think that was actually good because it helped me learn about business. It just helped me learn about like the dollars and cents of how things work. You have revenue that comes in, you have expenses going out. How do you make it so that the revenue coming in is bigger than the expenses going out? It's that freaking simple. And a lot of professional athletes, especially those who are 23, who maybe haven't acquired a business education, it's like not obvious, right? If you're signing a contract about what your impact is meant to be on a brand. Most sports marketing professionals don't say, like, hey, our expectation from your partnership with us is that we are going to be more credible in your market, in my case, trail running, and therefore sell more products significantly a multiple of revenue more than our expense of your contract amount. In other words, you know what I mean, Lucy,
Mm.
right? Am I being clear here?
Yeah, you got it.
So my point is, coming around to answering the question, if I were to be giving advice to 23-year-old new professional athlete, is to be a professional, to understand what the expectations are of your partners and why. And the only way you can really learn about that stuff is to do the thing. In the same way, the only way you can get good at being a trail runner is to do the thing, to be a trail runner and devote a lot of hours to it. The same is true for like having this education and understanding about like how to be a professional, is like you have to learn at some point. If it's not taking courses in college, then you should learn in some other way. And we have the benefit now to have postgraduate level education for free all over the internet. I have learned more from podcasts than I ever learned. I've learned more from podcasts in the last 12 months than I learned from my entire, life as a student from, kindergarten through college. So take advantage of that, is basically my point here. If you're 23 and you're looking to make a career for yourself as an athlete, learn the business side of it. And there's then a number of different ways that you can benefit from that new knowledge and education in a way that will make you more valuable and allow you to build a better career. Learn, do the damn thing. That's my advice, Lucy. How'd I do?
You did great. You know what? I learned a new word this past week, which actually fits well into sort of where you started. The word is autotelic, and it is doing something for the sake of doing something. And I think everything starts out that way. We didn't start Second Nature to make money, as you probably didn't start running races because you thought you were going to make money. We did it because it was something that sort of fulfilled us. And I think that, it's like a roller coaster. There's ups and downs to this whole thing. And when things go down, you don't want to be only there for the monetization side of it. You want to be doing it because it fulfills you in some bigger way. And I think that, you know, anything, whether it's doing podcasts, running races, being a mountain bike, whatever sport you're in, you got to be there for those reasons. And I think that I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, my friend Jaden, and he was talking about this idea of how, like a tree grows roots first. And that's what, literally roots it in place and then it pops up. Whereas, and so you have to develop those roots by establishing yourself, learning all these different things, and then you can kind of grow from there, as opposed to maybe something like a weed that shoots up really quick, but it doesn't have very firm roots and can get pulled out at any point, right? And
Wow, that's a brilliant metaphor.
we were thinking about it in terms of podcasts specifically, of like you really have to do a lot to establish yourself, your audience, your community, your value, and then you can really start to grow from there. But if you don't have that, then growing is not going to mean much. You could post 1 billion YouTube shorts and Instagram clips, but if the core of the community and the podcast isn't there, then it's not going to have any substance, right? And so I think a lot about that when it comes to careers. Like, make sure you're doing it the right way. Probably the results are a, call it 2 to 3 year delay. I'm experiencing that even now. I've been doing this thing for a long
100%.
time,
Yeah.
but actually the results that I'm getting now are the results that I expected to be getting 2 years ago, which is a really strange feeling, but maybe it's fair to tell people that they should expect that there's going to be a delay between what you're doing and when that's recognized on a wider scale. The lessons that I would share with somebody who's 23 and just signing their first contract or trying to sign their first contract is understand your own value proposition. Understand what you bring to the table to that partner. Just like you said, like what are their goals and how do you play into that? But also, as you're approaching sponsors, try to understand what value you bring to them so that the contract is congruent to that. So that when you get in the door, the thing that you're already doing is the thing that they want you to be doing. Because if you get this incongruent value proposition, then you're going to be doing stuff that you don't want to be doing that's not advancing your wider goal. And I think that's sort of an issue as well. So this idea of what is your value proposition? What do you bring to the table? And I think just to take it a step further, if you're a competitive athlete, the previous model that the generation before you had the benefit of is that media was somewhat centralized. And so winning an event meant that the centralized media was going to write a story about you, which was going to get you exposure, which was going to pay back into the sponsors. Now that media is not centralized, you are required to take that on and handle it yourself, which is why we keep banging the drum so hard on content, because there is no centralized source for the audience, for the community, for the partners, for the mainstream to kind of connect to. They have to find you on their own, unfortunately. But the benefit of that is that now there's nobody gatekeeping who gets featured. You can do it yourself. And if you're good at it, you can actually jump ahead of people and you don't have to rely on just competition to get the exposure that you would have had to get through only competition in the past.
Love it. We're 15 minutes in and we got through one question. So good though. So good. And I love that tree and root metaphor. It's totally accurate for my
Yeah.
experience, both in sport and in business.
I want to do a pod at some point about this where we talk about the difference between a crowd and a community, because I think that people see numbers and there's so much quantitative data, but the qualitative data is the thing that we need to find a way to get to share and to get everyone to understand that it's not about X number of views or X number of followers. It's about like the quality of that community and what that means. And you've heard me say a billion times, oh, we got the Davos panel of the outdoor industry. Like, how do we explain that to a potential partner versus like, oh, we had 100,000 downloads or whatever?
I think that's a good segue to question number 2.
Okay, here we go. Uh, Also, just in advance, if I mess up anybody's last name, I'm so sorry. I'm doing my best over here. um, okay, Katie Dreek, I got that right. I'd love to hear your point of view on how the momentum we can see happening behind female athletes and teams in traditional sports translates or doesn't translate into the world of outdoor sport and what the downstream implications are to that product innovation athlete deals. We're seeing incredible growth and influx of investments into the space for traditional sport, as well as signature products, events, and creative NIL contracts for athletes. Will we see the same momentum for women in the outdoors?
You want to go first?
Uh, sure. Yeah. Okay. I'll give it a shot. And again, like I'm doing my best here on this one. I do think that one thing that is happening across the board is that finally there are best practices. And, a lot of these conversations have taken a little bit of time to get across the line at some of the brands or event producers and stuff. But I think across the board, especially in the outdoor space, these event producers, these brands, these people are understanding that, like, whoa, we've been missing out on a ton of value. We need to like really do more here. And it's sad that it took this long. It's sad that it took so much data to get there. But now that it's happening, like everyone is showing up, the fact that they are evening out, having the women start earlier at some of the gravel races and some of these other races, I think is really like a good sign of all that stuff. But also like, and there's so many amazing athletes that are just finally getting the limelight that they deserve. And we've posted a handful of times. There was a document that basically it's called the fake. I think it's called the Fame Gap, and it just said like how women can actually raise an entire sport better than men can. Actually, like when you got the NCAA examples and stuff like that, but also, I mean, look at what Courtney Dauwalter has done for trail running, right? I mean, she has literally put it on her back and put it out into the mainstream,
Not an
and
exaggeration. Yeah.
yeah. And I think there's even more examples, and there will be even more examples. And, they've all done it through this filter of things not being set up for them necessarily to be successful. So what excites me the most is that now that the playing fields are being leveled, that the opportunities are being created, this next generation of women in the sport having less turbulence, less pushback to get to where they are, what will that actually unlock? That's what makes me the most excited. Red Bull Rampage this past year added in a women's category, a women's event, and that opened up careers for like double digit amount of new athletes who now had a new path to success. And so I think that while it's really exciting in the short term, the long term impact of this is we haven't even begun to see. And I think that we've used a lot of the examples from some of the mainstream sports to open the doors in the outdoor industry. But yeah, I think we're seeing incredible growth. But in 5 years, what will it look like? What will the opportunities be? What will the best practices be? The momentum is really starting to grow, and the traction is happening, and the athletes are running through the door. And just, yeah, I don't know. I'm just excited about it. I don't really have any like data points, but I'm just pumped.
Yeah. Yeah, you covered a lot of the stuff that I was thinking on this subject too. And admittedly, I don't have my finger on the pulse as much about like the economics of how women are represented in outdoor consumption and in outdoor media, and how brands are thinking about it. But subjectively, it does feel like there's already a ton of momentum and investment going into female focused content and other initiatives in outdoor specifically. You brought up Courtney Dauwalter, and as I was thinking about this, I thought this was just an interesting and important observation, in that Courtney Dauwalter is unequivocally the most important, most famous athlete in trail running. You could maybe make the argument that, Killian supersedes her to some degree, but I would say that there, aside from Killian, there's nobody who has as much of a cultural import in trail running than Courtney Dauwalter. I remember when we did the podcast episode where we focused on the signature shoe that Solomon put out with Courtney and how it sold out immediately. So clearly, not only is she famous, quote unquote, and that people love her, but that has also commercial and economic impact for her brand partners. And I was thinking about, like, in what other sport is the most famous athlete in the world a female? And it's hard to come up with an answer, right? Aside from Courtney in trail running. Like in mountain biking, I'm sure Kate Courtney is kind of up there in the conversation with those who have the biggest impact in their sport. Sasha DeJulian has been big in climbing forever. Just kind of thinking about in what other, because it doesn't happen in basketball, right? Caitlin Clark was a phenomenon, right? But you couldn't say that she was as famous as LeBron James, right? So what I'm trying to say is I already feel like outdoor sports and the outdoor community is kind of ahead of the game in this regard. And in the last few years, it feels to me at least like there's been a lot of progress made. It may not feel that way to the women in the audience here. I'm sure there's still a lot of progress that can be made, but to me it feels like there's already been a good job, that the industry's been doing a good job, even from the brand level. Obviously we had Corinne Malcolm on the podcast where you talked to her about her new role at Hoka, which is specifically helping Hoka think about women in trail running. Corinne was part of the Women's Trail Fund that started the Here for the Women's Race t-shirts, which became something that was almost like this mimetic viral product that people wear at every trail race to signal, their fandom for the women's side of trail running specifically. Like, that's a huge thing. And the fact that Hoka, which is the most powerful brand in trail running, hired somebody like Corinne, who's probably the most powerful female voice in the sport, to just focus on how do we activate women in trail running, like that's a important data point. So I feel like we're making a lot of progress. And then I guess the last thing that came to mind is sort of what you said about Rampage adding the women's category. Something similar happening in trail running, where with the Golden Trail World Series, the men and women in certain races have been racing on individual days so that it's not just a mass start and the women kind of get lost in the back of the men's pack, more or less. So they can have like an individual race of their own that feels sort of specific to the women's field. And I know that's been valued and been enjoyed by the professional athletes who've competed there. So I guess my point is that it feels like we're doing a good job, especially in trail running. I'm sure there's a lot more progress that can be made. But from my perspective, using those anecdotes of Courtney being such a phenomenon, of the brands really investing in storytelling and athlete recruitment with women specifically, and then these examples of women having a little bit of a different experience and having their own race within something like the Golden Trail World Series are three important data points. So
one thing that I want to add to the end of this is where I think there's an opportunity is in the industry side of it. And there's an organization called Uplift that our friend Rachel Burnside puts together. And there are all these mentors, all these women that are in it that are kind of trying to help the existing women in the industry and also make it a welcoming place for more people to come in. And I think, just like I was saying, how there's momentum, but now this next generation is going to, have the benefit of not having so strong headwinds. I hope that what also happens behind the scenes in the industry is that, it is a welcoming place to more women who are going to open those opportunities, like what Corinne is doing at Hoka. If that can happen at all of the outdoor companies, if there can be more people that are having their voices heard, that are getting opportunities to open more doors and bring more people into the sport and into the industry specifically. There's, even, certain, somebody said, oh, that looks kind of pale and male, and at a meetup recently. And I think, yeah, the more people we can get in, the more diverse faces and voices and people that can be a part of this industry, the better it will be for kind of everybody. And so, something that I'm looking for, something that I'm hoping for. And I think, again, the momentum is moving in that direction to include more people like that. So big shout out to the Uplift crew. And I know there's other groups that are, working on kind of the same goals, and yeah, full support.
awesome.
Okie doke. Next one is from our friend Ming, who has done so much in the Second Nature Slack. It feels appropriate that her question is about the Second Nature Slack. Ming asks, as our Second Nature Slack community is expanding so rapidly these days, curious to hear more about your thoughts and vision for it.
What are we up to? Almost 800 now
I
in
think we're
Slack?
pretty close. We are at 778 as of recording this.
All right.
Whoa.
All right. Well, I
That's
think we could probably power through this one pretty quickly. Thanks, Meng, for the question. I think taking a community from digital space to physical space would be the next step for me in terms of something that would excite me. Aaron has a head start on this with the meetups that you've done in Portland and at Sea Otter, which we should eventually talk about on the pod. But I haven't really been involved in any of that stuff, and it feels like we could do something that is bigger and provides like maybe a richer experience than just like a simple meetup, right? And not to say there's anything wrong with a simple meetup, but what if we were to, like, one thing that Aaron and I have talked about and that I've talked about with our partners at BOA, for example, we have a great relationship with the good people at BOA at their corporate office in Denver, and they have this beautiful space where we've done some events with Free Trail, film screenings, live podcasts, and things like that. Denver, of course, is home to a lot of industry people. So what if we were to do something like with BOA at their HQ, where we do a networking event? We take some of the interesting people in the outdoor industry who are operators at brands like, VF, the North Face, Ultra, BOA, Burton, etc. There's a bunch that are sort of in that front range geography, and, do something where we bring the community together, allow people to make some new relationships, new friendships, professional and otherwise, and also, do the content thing, have a conversation that we end up putting out into digital space. To me, that's really exciting, and I think could be a model that we then expand to other places like Portland, where, of course, there's a bunch of brands, like the Bay Area, where there's a bunch of outdoor oriented people who are building interesting things, and with technology and in the physical world also. I don't know. It feels like it'd be fun to do regional meetups like a couple of times a year where we bring operators together. We do a little bit of a live podcast thing and have a little happy hour and, you know, bring the community into physical space. What do you think?
Let's take it on tour. I like the idea. I mean, all the events that we've done in person, and I think probably the next in person event where we'll all be together is TrailCon, which feels like sort of an unofficial Second Nature meetup, if there ever was one. I love the idea of actually meeting in person. One other thing I want to say about the Slack channel and that community is like how valuable and important that group of people is, and how important it is to keep sort of the fidelity of that group intact. I don't want it to get overrun. It's growing rapidly and people are continuing to bring value, but I don't want it to end up being just like, 90% of the people coming in like only there to like get a job or whatever. Like I want people to keep bringing in value. And I think, if it ever gets to a point where we feel like that's changing, then we'll have to address it and make it so that the people who are there for the long haul and there for the value that they get out of it are staying there. I've only really had like I think one interaction with someone who like I could tell had never heard the podcast, and that's not what that space is for. It's for like, hey, you listen to the pod, you want to talk about the stuff we want to
Really,
talk
they
about.
signed up just because they thought there was a glimmer of hope that they'd get a job or something?
Yeah, it was just really clear. Like you've never even heard the podcast.
Yeah, the
Um,
Slack channel is best when, in the discussion tab, when somebody just drops like a link to a piece of news and then like a bunch of people go back and forth about what the implications are, or somebody sees a cool new product and throws it in the BPC channel and that leads to a conversation about like, oh, this is cool technology. What if they did this? That's where the Slack is best.
Yeah, the Let's Collaborate channel also. I mean, I just saw something get posted up today where there's a collaboration happening at the London Marathon because of a connection that came through that channel, which is crazy to me.
What? I mean, I
Yeah.
know your BPC today sort of loosely
Yeah,
connects to that too. Anyway,
I just love that there's actual collaboration happening within our community, and I think there's a lot more opportunity for stuff like that, and being able to be on a first name basis with people in the industry and to reach beyond your region or reach beyond your sport to connect with other people is something really special. And I guess all I'm saying is I just really want to make sure that we hold on to that and that we don't get overrun. And I think we're holding steady. So
it's
yeah,
growing. It's
yeah,
great. Love it. Thanks to everybody who's in Slack. We appreciate you all.
all 778 of you. Matthew Haynes asks, how do you prep for a pod or interview? Is it a lot of research and a big list of questions or a checklist? Is it something simple like a quick bullet list and you figure it out as you go? Did you get any tips from established podcasters or just figure it out yourselves? I mean, you're an established podcaster.
You
What do
go
you do?
first. No, you go first on this.
I would say that I've sort of figured it out as I go. My original way of doing it, I would write out all the questions, I would do all the research, and I'd get everything ready. And I would have sort of a direction or a plan in place for the conversation. And then the second that the conversation started going in a different direction, I was kind of lost. And that became something that I had to really work on. And thankfully, we've had a lot of reps on it now where I think my approach to the podcast now is to just get as much information as I possibly can about that person so I can have a nuanced conversation with them. We talk to them ahead of time usually to say like what would make this podcast a success for you. And we also kind of align on like what we think the conversation would be and how it might serve the audience the best. And I think that that's a really important part to me, at least with every single conversation we have on this podcast is intentional. It's never just like, oh, we know that guy. Let's talk to them about, whatever. We always have sort of like this intention of what value they're going to bring to our audience because so much of Second Nature is educational, whether strategic or tactical. our hope is that you're going to get something from it. This idea of cross pollination that I'm always hammering on is very intentional because we want you to take away something from the podcast. And so aligning on that ahead of time, I think has made for better podcasts so that we're all kind of working toward the same goal of like sharing something with the community that that person we think highlights in a really meaningful way. But I've definitely had to, you know, find ways to have the conversations, allow the guests to go in the direction that they want to do, and really be present in the moment as opposed to looking down at my notes the entire time of the questions that I wanted to ask. It's challenging. It's difficult to do that, and I think doubly so when both Dylan, you and I are on the podcast because you might have a direction that you want to go or a question you might want to ask, and you and I kind of go back and forth with questions when we're talking to people, and then you add a fourth person in, and it gets like more and more complicated the more people that are on, and so you have to be really on point, and all you can really do is do your best to prepare for it, and then just be in the moment to be able to ask the questions. But I usually make a little bit of a bulleted list so I have somewhere to go. But yeah, I don't know. Dealer's choice a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess to build off what you're saying here, the important thing is to really let the conversation happen in the way that it wants to. And usually that's dictated by what truly interests the guest. And that's always, I think, what I try to triangulate towards, similar to you, Aaron, as I prepare for podcasts, whether this one or on Freak Trail. I just try and learn as much as I can. I think that's a theme of just me as a person. It's just like I am always reading things, I'm always listening to things and absorbing as much as I can about who the individual is. I usually read about the person as much as I can. I try to avoid listening to podcasts with that person because I don't want it to inform the way I do the podcast. And it's just my preferred way to prepare, I guess. Maybe a bad strategy, but that's what I do. And once I feel like I'm confident that I know who this person is, then you feel a lot more comfortable in the conversation. In trail running and with a lot of the free trail podcasts, I have the benefit of knowing most of the people personally. In the cases that I don't, I try to reach out to mutual friends to understand a little bit more about who this person is, what makes them interesting and special, and just that little extra bit of effort is almost always rewarded in the conversation because people who know that person best usually have a sense of what might lead to engaging conversation, or again trying to triangulate towards what this person would actually want to talk about. Because speaking about the free trail podcast where we're talking about trail running, it's like, okay, yeah, we can talk about training, that's easy, whatever, but like what is this person actually into, what makes them actually tick? Because once you figure that out, they usually will have an interest in talking about it, which is important for the podcast. But then there's always some downstream implication for how that impacts their running, even if the thing they want to talk about has nothing to do with running. It in some way influences their running also. And I think the same is true with business, with second nature. So learn. And then, yeah, don't try and force it, right? Similar to you, Lucy, I almost always have like a few notes written down. And the sign of a good podcast is when you're not looking at your notes and you're just frickin' having a convo and, trying to, land in that target of what does this person actually want to talk about? Because that's where the conversation is best, I think, both for the host and the listeners.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like so much of the conversation is about building trust so that they are willing to share, as much information with you as possible. And if you're in your bulleted list or your question number 3 or 4, you're not building trust. You're just peppering them with questions. And I think that the conversation where you feel like you're grabbing coffee with them and having a chat and comparing notes and stuff ends up being not only a great conversation with that person, but something that people actually want to listen to and feel like, it's not just like a New York Times 10 questions with, it's an actual conversation where you get the real person and you get a chance to get some insight into how they got there and how you might emulate parts of that too. Okie doke. Next one. Christian Rawls. our friend who runs the Core podcast, and also Christian set me up with maybe still to this date one of my favorite newsletters, Billy Oppenheimer. So big thank you to Christian. Um, his question is, or statement, I don't know. It's the evening of March 21st, 2024. Tomorrow morning, you'll be hitting publish on the first episode of Second Nature. In a strange twist of hot tub time machine fate, in walks Dylan Bowman and Aaron Lutzy from episode 100. Dylan and Aaron from the future tell you the answers to these three questions. What should you ignore in the first year? What should you focus on in the first year? When is that super top secret product coming out?
Have we really been talking about that since episode 1?
Pretty
Jeez.
sure. I mean, we've been working on that thing forever.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
I can
Well,
bang through this real quick. So,
okay.
Christian, thank you for your question here. The thing that I would ignore in the first year is a thing that we definitely have ignored in the first year, and that is making money. I think this is really important, honestly, is
Yeah.
like allowing the thing to become what it wants to be. I actually just listened to a really interesting podcast with the founder of ButcherBox where that was kind of the theme. One of the things that sticks out to me is that a lot of the stress and pain I've experienced in building my business are the moments when I'm trying to force free trail to be a thing that it's not and that it doesn't want to be. And once you do build your own business, you understand that they kind of do take on a life and a spirit of their own. And it's your job as a founder to allow it to be that and not force it to be something else. And so that first year of not monetizing Second Nature, I think is important for us in just trying to figure out what is this thing. You know, we've, I think, arrived at a great format. People like the show. We also have sprinted, as we talked about at the top of this episode. And so there's times to make adjustments also, like we are by going from 2 episodes a week to 1. And I think ignoring the necessity of making money in the beginning ultimately allows you to figure out what the product is and what it wants to be a little bit more clearly in the early days. So then that sort of answers the second point. You know, what should you focus on in the first year is like figure out your format, your product, and, you know, really for us and Second Nature being specific about that, I think focus on building an audience, building a community, right? And I think we've done pretty well at that too. So ignoring making money, focus on making a good product and building a community around it. And when is that super top secret product coming out? Hopefully soon.
Oh, man.
One thing, Aaron, I'm sure we'll add more color to this, but one thing that we've realized is that Second Nature alone as a side project is a lot for us. And adding Secret Project as a second major, huge side project is just a lot for us. And so Aaron and I have been talking offline about how do we maybe bring somebody in who can really lead the Secret Project. We definitely will soon do a podcast where we go into all the details of this thing. It's still in process. I think it's still a great idea. To talk about it loosely, it is a consumer product for trail runners, something that people would use while trail running. And it's been an idea that I had and have sort of dreamed about for probably 4 years now. Lucy was the first person I told about it, and immediately he was like, let's do this. And yeah, I still feel very confident about it. What I don't feel confident in is my ability to like actually do it myself, really to spend hardly like any time on it other than just sort of like, you know, sort of helping to shape the vision early and being loosely involved. Like I am so busy with free trail, I just don't have the time to be heavy in the operations on Secret Project. So
I think if I've learned anything from the 99 conversations we've had before this, talking to people that have built their own brands and built their own businesses, is that it's like an all consuming thing to be able to do that. And one of the conversations we had with Ian from scratch, sort of offline, was like, I'll be curious to see what you guys give up to be able to do this. And I think both of us are like, I don't want to give anything up. And I think it takes a lot of discipline and focus to do all the things that we're doing, and also like discipline to know that, hey, we actually can't do this. We have to find somebody to be able to basically run this for us. And I think we're relatively close to sorting this out, but yeah, I'm excited to share it because it is something that's so cool, and it's going to be awesome whenever we finally get to, get everything lined up. But and we've done a lot of work to get to this point. It's not like we're at zero by any means. Okay, I want to go in here. Something that we should ignore the first year, and I think this is a piece of advice that I give a lot of people, is that the best and worst part about creating is that in the beginning, no one cares. When you're starting out and you make content, no one cares, which is great because you can kind of find your way without having a lot of eyeballs on you. But it can be sort of frustrating to be working really hard and not having anybody care. And I think one of the things to ignore that first year, and monetization falls within that, but just even having any expectations whatsoever, they say that, comparison is the thief of joy. And the idea of us being like, oh, well, how do we stack up to this pod or this media or this thing over here would have totally made this whole thing not that fun. And so this, going back to the autotelic uh, word of, we're just doing it because we love to do it. We're doing it for the sake of doing it. And we're really happy to have people along for the ride, but we would do it anyway. And 100 episodes without monetization is proof of that, I think. We are building the roots. We're building the community. We're bringing everyone together, and that's enough. I think that's really it. I've been asked so many times about, like, how are you gonna monetize Second Nature? And while I appreciate that, it's like, what would it look like if we never monetized Second Nature? What would it look like if we just kept making this because we love to make it and everything else made it so that we could?
Yeah,
You know,
but that's not realistic.
no, but I mean, look at
I
Scratch.
mean, you and I do talk about fairly
Sure,
frequently about like, okay, how are we going to monetize this thing?
yes, but what I'm saying
And
is
it's
like,
not clear, we should say.
sure, sure. There's no like straightforward way to do it. And I think while there are ways to monetize, it'd be really cool to have a best practice that wasn't tied into that. I mean, I guess what
Your point is very well made, and I 100%
yeah,
agree. Like I said, this is like my favorite podcast.
yeah, yeah,
There's few podcasts where it's an instant press play and listen start to finish for
yeah,
me.
yeah,
This is one of them. And that's one of the reasons why you and I created it, is because like we wanted this content, right? And I feel like I learned something important from every episode, especially the ones that I'm not on. So no, but I just sort of reemphasizing your point. But like at a certain point, yeah, I mean, you can't ignore the need to like be compensated for your work eventually.
yeah. I just think, the indirect stuff that
Unless,
comes,
sorry, unless it's like definitely gonna be just like a fun passion project, side project forever,
yeah.
which
I,
it could be.
I just love the way we had that conversation with Scratch, and they're like, well, we just want to like take care of athletes, and Scratch is the way that we do all those things. I just take a lot of inspiration of like the indirect stuff that we get from being on this podcast. It isn't necessarily monetization directly, but we get opportunities, we get doors opened up, we get, all kinds of great stuff from being the hosts of this podcast. What would it look like if that just took on a life of its own, and we didn't need to necessarily run ads or whatever, and we could just do this for the love of it because we were being compensated in other ways. I would love to find what that scenario might look like too. Yeah, no pressure to do this, only just doing it because we love doing it. And I don't know, but yeah, when we suggest stuff, will people probably follow through on it? I think so. BPC is a great example of that. We've not monetized quote unquote BPC, but a lot of people go through and buy the books that we recommend or try out the stuff that we share or whatever. So I don't
Maybe we'll build a just huge affiliate empire on
know.
PPC. No, I think this is important though. And like when I am most in pain around my business, it's when I'm thinking about money.
Mhm.
And I hate it. I hate it. But it goes back to this roots for trees, right? For 3 years, I worked my ass off on free trail and didn't pay myself. And now that the business is in a good place, I wouldn't say I'm like significantly less stressed about money than I was in the early days, because then you're just worried about, what if we lose this money? It's like, I don't know. So having a greater mission to it, as you're articulating here, like what Alan and Ian said from scratch about like, let's just help athletes and just trust that that will be enough to lead us to a place where this will be a sustainable enterprise. That's more and more the disposition I'm trying to take with Free Trail, and certainly with Second Nature, of just like, I like what I do. It's with Free Trail, I feel like it's an important service to, the great sport of trail running. And let's just do it while this is working and hope that we can do it over the long term, and just like try not to stress so much about the dollars and cents of it all.
Absolutely. Uh, what should you focus on the next year? The thing that I would tell myself from 100 episodes is actually the community. Just focus on the community. Listen to the feedback that you're getting, because it is incredibly valuable. And then mix that with what you think. I think we've gotten all kinds of advice, and some of it has been really useful, and some of it has not. And I think when you hear something that resonates with you, you have the opportunity to turn that into something. And I think that one of the biggest things, we've talked about many times, is the Slack channel. We kept hearing from people that they wanted to be part of the conversation. We made that possible. And probably one of the best things that's come out of the last 100 episodes has been the community that's formed in that Slack channel. And I think just listening to your audience, listening to the people in your community of what their needs are, and then trying to find a way to sort of deliver on those needs as best as we can, given our limited time and resources. I think that was something that was really important that we actually did do. Um, that's what I would focus on. So ignore comparing yourself to anything else. Focus on the people that are there for you and for the conversations, and just bring as much value as you possibly can. Everything will be fine. Words to live by. Okay, next question is from Mark DeJong.
Is there anything you wanted to add to the secret project?
I think you covered it.
All
I
right.
think, I mean, I'm just as excited as anybody else to be able to share it, and I'm absolutely frothing, but I feel like it wouldn't do any good to share it until we had actually something to.
Yeah, we'll have to carve out like 2 hours to actually talk through this publicly once it's ready.
And the thing is, like, even though we haven't been able to talk about it on the pod yet, it's not like we're not making progress or we haven't worked really hard on it. It's just, it's not ready.
How about Ian Gates? He sent us an email like yesterday. Ian Gates, shout out. He's our IP attorney, former guest here on the podcast. And we do have like our brand name protected. So maybe some top secret trademark database sleuths might be able to do some reverse engineering to figure out what we're working on. But we're slowly but surely making progress on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's exciting.
We'll get there. Next question is from Mark DeJong. Inspired by the podcast with Payson, for each of you, when did the thing you've built, Free Trail, Second Nature, Super Rider, become more successful or meaningful than each of your individual careers? What was that inflection point, and what made you feel that way? Or has it not happened yet?
You want to go first?
You go first.
Okay. So this is a complicated one to answer. So when I decided to go all in on Free Trail, I was probably 34 years old, 35 years old. I was still working at my last job while continuing my career as a professional athlete. I was lucky to have good income just from being an athlete. So going full time on Free Trail before we monetized was not totally reckless, although it was painful. It was a sacrifice to delete the majority of my income to go after this kind of startup idea. What I definitely had and what I still have is an instinct that I'm onto something. And I think that's a really important thing to tune into. And it was pretty quickly that I developed that instinct. And once that instinct was present, that's when it became more meaningful. I wouldn't necessarily say more successful, but more meaningful than my job at the time. It was like there was clearly the trail running market was receptive to our content, getting connected with Ryan Thrower and sort of having this bigger idea of like, well, what if this isn't just a podcast? What if it's like a bigger media entity? Like that was a very meaningful moment in my life in retrospect. But, as I have just said, it took a long time for us to figure out the business and the quote unquote success of Free Trail. And it wasn't until, more recently, really in the last 12 months, I would say, where it's become clear that, like, okay, this thing is working. Because for 3 years, I didn't pay myself or my wife. Everybody was making major sacrifices. And it wasn't fully clear that it was going to work, even though we had this instinct that we were onto something. But we didn't give up and eventually sort of made it through that valley of uncertainty. And I think, it's really only been in the last, 12 months, like I said, where it feels like it's become quote unquote more successful than my last job. I will say though, I make less money now than I did when I was in my early 30s still, even though I own my own business. And so it's still not without sacrifice. Obviously, like I have more control over my own time. I'm building something that I own, and that's different than collecting a paycheck. For some people, it's better. For some people, it's worse. I would say I'm naturally not great. Like, I think somebody else would be better at running my business. Like, I think I would be happier as a W 2 employee at a big company than I am trying to start my own thing. And so, in some ways, I feel way more successful than I used to be when I had just a normal job and was a pro athlete. And the joy and pride I have from knowing that I've built something from 0 to 1 with a group of incredible people to be something that is now a sustainable business is awesome. But yeah, at the same time, I still make less money. I still work 5 times as hard. And like Harmony and I were talking last night about like, how much longer do I feel like I could move at the intensity I'm going at? And it's not that much longer. Like, I don't know. And I guess final point is for me is I've come to learn that you really have to stop thinking about the future when you have something like this. Like you have to just think about like, okay, what does this want to be on its own? How can I be in service of making this business the thing that it wants to be? And when the founder's desires for a company align with the company's own desires of itself, that's when I think magical things happen. And the pain always comes when those two things are in opposition. So I don't know if that in any way answered Mark's question, but that's my contribution there.
I like it. I think, you've made tons and tons of progress over the last, 6, 7 years, just like Payson did with his stuff. And you've, set best practices in place that even Payson is following. I think that episode was really an interesting one to just hear you guys both talk about, how far you've come and what has gone into the success that you've done. I think for me, I'm still a couple years behind when it comes to feeling the effects of all the work that's gone in and getting to that point and the results where I feel like I have a really meaningful business. I feel like I have a lot of irons in the fire that are warm but not hot. And I would say for Second Nature, the inflection point where I felt the how meaningful it actually is has been the handful of conversations that I've had with people that I really respected that I'd met for the first time. And I started explaining the podcast, and they looked at me and said, I know, I listened to it. And what? That moment cannot be replicated. That is such a special thing when someone you respect is listening to what you're creating or watching what you're creating or whatever. That moment for me is when I truly realize what Second Nature means to people besides us. You and I have always had these conversations even before we recorded it on a podcast, but now that we started sharing them out with a wider audience to get that kind of feedback from people, to get the word of mouth that's spread, to see the roots of this community take hold is really when you feel like, wow, whatever we're doing, like this means something. And it means something to people besides just you and me. And I think that's really what matters. And kind of going back to our earlier point, like that's the stuff that I want, and that's the stuff that's going to make a difference in the long run. And yeah, I'm just happy to do it. And I don't know if I'll ever feel like it's more successful, quote unquote. The job I quit to go all in on this and Super Rider was really great and came with a lot of benefits. But I'm happier now by like an order of
Are
magnitude,
you?
way happier.
See, that's interesting, right? Because I know what you made at your last job.
Yeah. It was,
And like, so this is an important thing, right? Like, I make less money than I did when I had like a cushy sales job and was a pro athlete. And, you know, now I have a kid and a mortgage. And like, forgetting about money is a gift. And I, like I said, the pain usually comes when you start thinking about that stuff, but it is practical, like it's necessary. And it's interesting because I would say I'm less happy than when I was just a normal regular employee and a pro athlete. I would say that pretty confidently. Or like at least yeah, I'm a lot more stressed by owning a business.
I think I just was getting tired of having to ask permission to go to the bathroom, like, oh, you've only got a couple weeks of PTO a year. Like, that's all you get. And I just don't function well in those. I mean, I functioned fine, but it was getting to me, and I wanted to have creative freedom. I wanted to have every sort of freedom. But I also, your point, recognized how privileged that is. Like, I worked really hard at that job, but I saved up intentionally so I could pull the chute and spend a year trying to figure out if I could make this thing work. And yeah, if you were going short term with all this stuff, not intelligent financial decisions, but thankfully I had made good decisions before that. And also I believe the long term result of all this stuff will balance back out. This idea of long term thinking is not something that a lot of people do. In the same way that a lot of people wouldn't start a YouTube channel because they're like, how can I monetize in the first 12 months? It's like, well, you can't. It's going
Yeah.
to take you a long time to make that make sense. But now,
And
five
if you
years
try
in,
to, your product is going to suffer and you won't be able to develop as good of an audience.
yeah, this idea of long term thinking makes a huge difference.
Oh,
If
it's
you
so
can,
necessary.
yeah, if you can hold your breath this long, you'll be rewarded.
You have to assume it's going to take twice as long and be twice as hard.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would say for anybody who's starting something, you have to give yourself 3 years of sheer agony.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
to give yourself 3 years to
Um,
even start getting a glimmer of the progress.
yeah.
Seriously. Yeah.
We have a bunch of additional questions, but there's no way we're gonna get through
No,
them.
no.
Let me just end on one that could be kind of a fun one. This and it's sort of related to what you and I were just talking about. It's from Mark Jantosik, and he said, if you had one full week totally free, no work, no family obligations, what personal outdoor project or adventure would you dive into? Something that's been simmering in the back of your mind, but you keep saying one day.
So this is like it's something where you're going out and doing some heroic feat of strength.
Anything you want. I can't even imagine what I would do if I had free time because I just, you know,
Lay in bed for God's sakes.
try to get a 100 sleep score on my aura.
Yeah. I mean, that is definitely my answer.
Sleep, just sleep.
Sleep, recover. You know, Harmony is starting the Huffman process on Saturday, Aaron.
Good
So,
rest.
yeah, that was a life-changing thing for me, and having a week without my phone, without internet, without exercise, and it really made me understand how much rest you can compress into 7 days if you just remove all those things. We're going to Hawaii in a couple weeks, and I'm going to try and duplicate my Hoffman experience, but with my family. In other words, put the phone away, disconnect from the internet, not exercise, and just really try and rest before going into the teeth of summer season, which is going to be very busy. Me, for like a heroic feat of strength, if I had a week, I would do the Haute route in Europe between Chamonix and Zermatt, Switzerland. It's about a 100-mile hiking route where you can stop at huts along the way, and sort of have a civilized adventure where you can sleep at night and have espressos and pies, but you're still getting a big day out in the mountains in between.
Sounds
That's
great.
something that's been on the bucket list for a long time.
I think if I had a full week totally free, I would do sort of the same thing. I would just go mountain biking and I wouldn't bring my phone or my camera or anything. I would just go ride my bike. And I've been trying to incorporate more rides into my week where I'm not filming. But it's like this whole idea of like the cobbler's son has no shoes. Like I'm a mountain bike content creator, but every single time I'm on my bike, I'm creating something, and I'm missing out on the opportunity to just ride for the soul of it. And I really, really miss being able to do that. So I think I'm trying to incorporate that more and more on a regular basis anyway. But if I had a full week, that's probably what I'd do. Just go ride my bike a bunch and just enjoy being out there on two wheels, just living the dream.
Bada
Simple.
bang, bada boom.
What do you got
Episode
for
number 100 BPC. You go
yeah, what
first.
you want to go? Okay, all right, I'll go first. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see my hat here. It is made by Terragnota, and our friend Abigail West is actually the designer of the pattern on the hat. And I saw this originally pop up in the Slack channel in the community BPC, a collaboration between two people in the Second Nature Slack channel, which I think is pretty awesome. So I texted Alex, who, spoiler alert, is going to be on an episode very soon. And I said, hey, just real quick, was that collab hat with Abigail? Was that something that was already kind of in the works, or was that like a Second Nature connection? Like, did we have a small role in it maybe, or was it already a thing? And he wrote me back and he said, we actually met a couple years back at a trail race on Mount Hood, but then we reconnected a couple months ago at a race in Arizona and bonded over Second Nature. And she's the one that convinced me to join the Slack channel. So while it wasn't 100% Second Nature, we had a big part in lighting the spark to get this hat made. So this hat, hopefully there are still some available, but we are repping our good friends at Terragnota and our friend Abigail West right here in this hat. Really proud of this one. I'm so excited. Now, honestly, all the collaborations that have come out of the people in our Slack channel has been really special, but this one, like to physically be able to wear a hat that has even 1% of a connection to Second Nature just kind of blows my mind.
Heck yeah. So, to be more specific, Terragnota is a trail running apparel brand for now. Alex was at Gorge Waterfalls a couple weeks ago, and we got to chit chat a little bit about it. I'm really excited to do that podcast, and he actually just sent me this. Can you see this, Lucy?
Yeah.
T-shirt with the Free Trail brand sublimated on top of it. I'm really excited about what Alex is doing, and we connected about a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here today. Just kind of the ups and downs of starting your own thing. Him being kind of a solo operator, trying to learn the apparel business by drinking from the fire hose. Have nothing but respect for that. And actually, Abigail West and I ran Chuckanut together. She introduced herself to me, and she said, "Hey, I've been talking to Lucy about Secret Project." So yeah. Abigail's one of the few people who's been read in on this top secret confidential project. We're probably way overselling this now when we announce it. People are gonna be like, "What the hell are you guys doing?"
I'm gonna text you her work because she
sent
helped
it to
me
me.
out.
Yeah,
Oh,
she
see
sent
it?
it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, cool. My BPC here today, as we're recording this, it is Tuesday, April 22nd. Yesterday was the Boston Marathon. Of course, we're trail people here, but the Boston Marathon sort of transcends sport. It's a iconic, important moment in the year for endurance athletes. And a woman named Sharon Lokedi, Kenyan athlete, won the women's race and broke the course record at Boston, a big deal. And to me, what made this stick out is that she's an Under Armour athlete, Aaron. In the last decade, of course, road marathoning has been undergoing this crazy revolution in product that's been leading to all these course records being destroyed with the advent of these supercritical foams and carbon plates and shoes. And a brand that I think has been less represented in the sport on the podiums with the pro athletes has been Under Armour. And this goes back to episode number 1, full circle here.
Wow.
Episode number 1, we talked about Kevin Plank's return as the Under Armour CEO. Now in episode 100, celebrating Sharon Lokedi, who won the Boston Marathon wearing the Under Armour Velocity Elite. So that's my product here for BPC. I don't know if it's fully available, Lutzi. Like I searched on Under Armour's website. I think this is sort of a prototype that she was wearing, but you can find it on their Instagram account. And just wanted to give a shout out to Under Armour, who it looks like is now going to be a player in the super shoe market. And, you know, for Under Armour now to own the course record at the Boston Marathon, that's a big deal for the brand. So just wanted to recognize it here on the pod.
Very cool.
Full circle.
Did I see a piece of news that a famous marathoner is now joining the ranks of ultra running?
Come on, bro. Des Linden. It's happening. She announced her retirement. And she signed up for the Tunnel Hill 50 miler in the fall, where she it's more of a road race. She's going after the 50-mile world record. It's mostly soft surface, like a dirt road. So, and it's at a good time of year where you can run fast times. I think it's in Illinois, I want to say. Super flat course, fast underfoot, but soft. So a lot of fast times have been run there. In fact, Courtney Olsen broke the women's world record there last year. So Des is trying to break Courtney's world record at the same place this year. I'm assuming. And also she's going to be pacing somebody at the Western States 100, which is of course going to be more of a trail experience. So we're hoping she gets indoctrinated.
Is that the event that happens after TrailCon?
Yes. Yes. Yes, yeah. No, we are the opening act. The opening act for Western States.
Very cool.
Buddy, 100 episodes in the bag. Holy smokes.
Just incredible. Honestly, so cool. And a big thank you to everybody who's listened to any of the episodes or all of the episodes. Both. We're happy that you're here if you're new or if you've been around for a while. I would say one thing that really I'm learning is helping us out is people giving us reviews on iTunes and Spotify and stuff. That seems to really help more people discover it. And of course, if you share it with somebody, that's great too. But you know, that would mean a lot to get a recommendation or get a review or leave us a comment on YouTube of, you know, when you started listening to the pod, any of that stuff to sort of juice the algorithm so more people that love what you love can find us.
Yeah. And if you're building something right now and you listen to Second Nature because it helps you, get in touch with us because we would love to learn more about what you're doing, what you're building. Like I said, I'm reluctant to give anybody advice on anything, but at least we can be wingmen, cheerleaders, and maybe share a few bits of perspective on whatever you're doing. So get in touch with us via any number of different platforms. We're not hard to find on the internet.
That's right. Onwards and upwards.
Hell yeah. Thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate you all. 100 more ahead of us. 500 more ahead of us. We're just getting started here, right, Aaron?
That's right.
Hell yeah. For Aaron Lucy, I'm Debo. See you guys later.